Hello. This episode of the Future Natures podcast is a conversation with Cansu Sönmez. She's a doctoral student at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila, Italy. Cansu has been researching people's responses to large infrastructure projects like dams and railways that disrupt their lives and the spaces where they live. In the last 2 years, most of the old town of Hasankeyf in Turkey has been flooded after a new dam was built across the River Tigris to provide irrigation and hydroelectric power. Alongside people's houses, Hasankeyf was home to many historic monuments and places of cultural significance. The region around the town is also considered among the least developed parts of Turkey, and it has a history of conflict, including struggles between Kurdish people and the Turkish state. Cansu also told me about her research in the Susa Valley in northern Italy, where local people and their allies are protesting against a new high-speed rail link, the TAV or TAV, which threatens to pollute and disrupt the local environment. We talked about what people are doing to respond to the threat and the disappointments of grand construction projects and the legacies they leave behind. We also discussed the ambivalent feelings that people have in these places and the possibilities of care, hope, and resistance. I started our conversation by asking Cansu about what she saw when she visited the old town of Hasankeyf in Turkey for the first time.
What was it like when you went there for the first time? What was going on at that point?
The dam was already done. The construction was already done. The first operation of the dam started 2020 in May. But before, obviously, the situation I would describe, after an earthquake, what you can see in a city. Imagine a disaster, what you can possibly see in a place. It is mostly the same, and it has mostly the same feelings, for me, like seeing the city like that, because I've seen empty houses, people left. Obviously, they have to leave their houses, and evictions already started in the early 2020. However, some people, a few families, like maybe 10, 15 families, were still in their houses, and they were telling me, I have nowhere to go. I don't know where to go, because these people, they didn't meet the compensation criteria to be resettled in the new town.
Right.
So that's the reason. They were telling me, we don't know where to go. So I stay here until the water comes into my bedroom,
Wow.
These kind of stories. And then after I heard that, obviously the pandemic came, pandemic restrictions came, and then I had to leave. And I heard that after some of these people were being relocated by this government.
And it's just to set the scene, so that the Turkish government built a new town kind of up the hill from the old Hasankeyf, and some people were able to resettle into the new town. Is that right?
Yeah.
But not everybody kind of got a place.
Yeah, unfortunately, it happened like that. I mean, it's because the settlement law requires some criteria for people they need to meet. And the first thing is having a family status, like you need to have a family. I mean, you need to be married. And this marriage has to be done before 2013, if I'm not wrong.
Right.
And of course, it's not free, by the way. Resettlement houses they still need to pay, but after 5 years, they are going to pay after the first 5 years of the resettlement.
So, yeah, very big disruption to people's lives, and I just wondered sort of what were the different reactions that you noticed among people that you talked to
Yeah, there were different reactions, different emotions. Some people were happy that they have been resettled because they have I mean, at the moment, nicer, comfortable, bigger houses that they didn't have before, because all my participants acknowledge the fact that old houses were not really livable, you know. I heard stories like, there is a family, just one room they have kitchen in the room, they have, you know, they are sleeping in the room. The room functions also as a living room, not just bedroom. So it's just, you know, it's a very small houses, and the toilet used to be outside. They need to go outside. But they used to have a garden. They used to have animals that for the livestock, you know, and so they have these very, you know, intimate connections with each others, of course. But the fact is, of course, I mean, the house conditions were not so good. But the reason for of this is Hasankeyf was a conservation area. This was claimed in 1920s, and sorry, 1980s. So that means you cannot reconstruct your house, you cannot rebuild, you cannot invest in your house. So this is a constraint, you know. This is what people are waiting, let's say, all these years, because the dam gives a promise to have a better life in after the dam. But before, they have to, you know, live in these conditions. The only condition to get a better house is after the dam being built. So this is the feeling, like people waiting in that, you know, limbo is a kind of like dead end, let's say. There is like, they cannot escape, they cannot do anything in that moment, in that mood. Also feeling, you know, trapped in that conditions.
Right, so they felt like they in order to get a better house, they had to accept the dam being built.
Exactly. So this is the maybe main reason some of my participants were really happy to, you know, to be able to live in a better housing conditions.
Right.
But yeah, this is something also ambivalent, and in my also thesis I discuss about this, and the people have ambivalent experiences, because what happens, even though they are happy with the new housing conditions in the resettlement town, they still have something missing, you know. They feel like they lack of something, which are and cannot be fulfilled in the resettlement conditions. And this where I think we talk about a sense of place attachment, and emotions that occur in relation with the space, and effective experiences with the space. So these are things that cannot be compensated for people. Yeah, this is sometimes, you know, put people in a happy condition, but also in a sad condition, let's say sad mood. So this is like ambivalence, and people have to go through these ambivalent experiences every day in everyday practices. And also another important thing I should mention about ambivalence is related to historical artifacts and their relocation. So when we talk about indigenous communities, I mean, like Kurdish, Arab communities, Assyrian communities, Christian communities, they're all indigenous communities. So they have their own ways to do something, their own ways to practice making a space, you know. So during my research, I acknowledged these indigenous ways of doing things and practices. So cultural heritage are very important for people's everyday life. It is something beyond just historical artifact, because for tourists it's just a tomb of a religious person, or ruins, Roman ruins for a tourist. It has a value of cultural value for tourists to see and understand the culture and history. It's a great thing. But for indigenous people, for people living there, it's beyond the cultural and historical meaning. Because people, generations by generations, they create strong attachments with the tomb. And one of the examples is Zeynel Bey tomb, for instance, or Imam Abdullah. These are important Islamic figures, let's say. Yeah, and people create a strong relations with this tomb. For instance, one of my participants were telling me that these historical artifacts are not just, historical monuments or something like material, these used to be my friends. I used to go, around the Zeynel Bey tomb, the green area around Zeynel Bey tomb, and I used to play hide and seek. And he told me when I, losing him, when I see that Zeynel Bey tomb was relocated, as if I felt I lost my friends. I lost my close childhood friends.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not just they're sacred, they're kind of sacred and religiously important places, but they're also places where people used to just be and hang out as children, or so there were memories associated. So those places have been, like, some of those have been moved, right? So they've moved the actual stone of the thing, but it's been moved to a different piece of land.
Yeah, exactly.
Something's been lost in the process.
Some of them, like 7 or 8 of them, were only relocated into the new town. And this is something like I call this interaction, these strong emotional attachments, to the ancestral history, cultural practices, and knowledge. So I call this interaction like indigenous social infrastructures. In the literature of social infrastructure, it functions. We see that social infrastructures, they function as, bringing people into the public space, create connections, create community relations, conviviality of a city life. So social infrastructures function in this way, as Eric Klinenberg mentions widely, comprehensively in his book in 2018. And I saw that, I understand that these historical artifacts are just indigenous social infrastructures that create people for a space to get together, spend time, socialize, foster community relations, networks. So these are very important for everyday life of indigenous people. Beyond the cultural heritage, beyond the historical artifacts, beyond the values, historical and cultural values, I think we need to see and understand their everyday value as well.
I just wanted, I just want to come back to something that you mentioned before, that you were saying that people experience this ambivalence in their everyday practices, that people are sort of continually living with this sense of both being happy that they've got somewhere maybe nicer to live in a practical way, but also regretting or missing or grieving for something that's been lost. How does that sort of manifest in the everyday life of people there?
Yeah, it manifests in many ways, to be honest, in many ways. Even just living in the resettlement house is enough for that, I think. Because even like living in the house, like just sleeping and waking up in the other day. So it's just this is more than enough, I think. But I can also give example. Yeah, tandoor ovens. Let me give you an example about tandoor ovens. So tandoor is a ethnic oven, let's say, is very common in the eastern part of Turkey and also Middle East, and it has a particular shape and particular structure to work. And most women in the old town, in Old Hasankeyf, they used to have their own tandoor ovens inside their residential gardens or outside. And tandoor ovens function in many ways for women, especially. They is a kind of everyday practice. They cook bread inside. They also cook other food inside. But also tandoor functions for women as a way of socializing with other women, because they invite other women to cook something in the tandoor ovens. So this is a kind of, I think, a very important, and I consider it a social infrastructure because of these functions. It carries ancestral knowledge. It has a cultural and historical value for people. But also women are strongly also emotionally attached tandoor ovens.
So are they like ovens that are, what's the fuel? Is it like charcoal, wood burning?
Inside they put some wood and then they burn inside. So why I gave this example, because in the resettlement town, the settlement law prohibits people to construct a tandoor in their residential gardens. So most of women felt like super uncomfortable about lacking a tandoor oven. One of my participants, she told me that I came here, I started to buy my bread from the market the first time in my life, the first time. And she is like 50 years old, 55. And then she told me after, I didn't like it. I mean, I cannot eat a bread that I cannot buy it from outside. I cannot eat it. Then I start to cook in my oven inside my house. But the oven is general modern oven that we all have in our houses. And she told me, still, it feels so strange to me. I don't want to eat this bread even. And however, there are just, I think, maybe 4 or 5 tandoor ovens in the whole city. And obviously, this is not enough, because also this is not practical for women their houses are far away from the tandoor ovens. So she told me, I cannot carry everything. I don't have a car. I cannot, walk the tandoor oven. It's too far away from me. But still, I try. I manage with my children. And then, so we see that they try to keep up the tradition, keep up the habits they used to have. And some women, even though this is not legal, this was prohibited by the law, some women, some families, they reconstructed tandoor ovens in their residential gardens. So this is informal construction, and they start making bread in the tandoor in their own place. But the point is, people told me, they don't allow constructing tandoor, but we cannot live without that.
Yeah.
So this attachment to their ancestral heritage and ancestral, keep up the ancestral knowledge and practice it every day. And on the other hand, so this is where ambivalence comes, I think. On the other hand, some women told me, tandoor was good. I mean, I was, enjoying eating tandoor bread in the old town. Is a culture for us, is important for us to eat every day, cook every day in tandoor and so on. But she told me, like, we were actually outside, we were sitting in her garden, and she told me that I don't like the smell. You feel the smell of bread right now? She asked me, and I said yes. And she told me, I don't like it anymore, this smell. It feels strange to me because we are in a new place, we are in a new city, and I said, why? I mean, why? I mean, you grow up with tandoor. And she said, yes, I know, but it just, annoys me because, I mean, it's a different place, she told me.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was a common place in Hasankeyf, and everybody has it, she told me. Everybody used to have tandoor, so everybody was okay with that. But now not everybody has tandoor.
And now it feels kind of weird.
Yeah, it feels kind of
because of the new
the
vibe
urban
of the place.
It's so these stories are telling us important things about people's everyday effective experiences, I would say, because they are emotionally also attached, and is not only cooking there. The point is not to cook there. The point is to be themselves. So it is, I think, is what the colonial scholars underline always, the self-determination. I consider this a way of, seeking for a self-determination and for their lives, to be able to make their own choices, to be able to have a power. They are capable of doing that, and they show it somehow.
Right.
Even though the law doesn't allow them to do so. So they still seek for, creating their own life worlds, let's say.
That's fascinating. And it kind of speaks to the way that people value everyday things in a way that it can't be exactly measured, or it can't be just substituted, replaced by something else. There's connections to people's sort of communal life and people's sort of memories and the things that they've learned growing up and their response to place. So it's kind of all connected. It's interesting to think about that, and then just moving people to a different place, even though it's just up the road. You can, maybe have a nicer house, but you're losing something in the process.
It's also, I think, interesting to see the urban redevelopment practices and how these practices diminish these local ways of life, ways of doing things, and knowledges and everyday practices. Because in this general urban planning, general urban redevelopment plans, it tends to, push people in a, let's say, modern way of life without considering pre-existing ways of life. And obviously people feel, paradoxical sometimes. People feel in this ambivalent atmosphere. So this is what I think, if I need to, recommend something, this would be, the biggest recommendation of my research, like considering the pre-existing social bonds, social relations with infrastructures, the social infrastructures, what is important for people's culture, I mean, in everyday life. Because at the end, everyday life makes a whole life, I think. So, like, small steps create a big picture, right? Create a big, let's say, movements. When you take small steps, at the end of the day, right, you have a big movement. So this needs to be considered because it's not a one size fits all. It can never be like that. It can happen in other parts of the world, definitely, and it's happening in Latin America, in most of the Asians, South Asian countries that are trying to building these mega projects, mega dams. But I think the issue is not embracing the modernity or technology. I think the problem is hegemonically pushing people in a framework, in a life, in a certain way of life. They're putting them in a, let's say, iron cage, in Weberian term, in an iron cage, and push them to, live in a certain way. There is no issue, there's no problem living in modern life, adapting modern life, technology, using technology. But the issue is you just, brutally, let's say, ask people to forget their past, to forget their this indigenous intergenerational knowledges that have accumulated so far. So this is the problem, I think. This is the problem. You ask them through these projects, you force them to forget their roots, where they come from, and what they have learned so far, how they have been grown up so far, what kind of interactions, neighborly relations they have created, and the value of the space. I think this is the issue in Hasankeyf and also in other parts of the world.
The ultimate symbol of that is literally that your old house is covered in water. It disappears under the water, and you can't even see it anymore. It must be it's a very strange experience for people. It's that feeling of kind of being pushed and really having no choice.
Exactly, because most people told me, if I had better option, I would do that. But I have been left no option than living in a resettlement town or migrate to inner city or other cities, the surroundings.
And can we talk a bit about the other area you worked, the research that you did in Italy, this high-speed railway project in between the city of Lyon in France and the city of Turin in northern Italy? There's been a project that's been underway for a number of years, crossing the very mountainous border to create a faster link between the two cities. The justification for the project is kind of saving carbon emissions, cutting down on the amount of goods that have to be carried by lorries, and speeding up the connection. But you were looking in particular at a valley in northern Italy where people were protesting against this project, and some people very angry about the project and mounting sort of public campaign against it. I wondered what you found there.
The project is called Turin-Lyon High-Speed Railway Project, and since 1990s it has been an issue in the Italian public. It's always been a controversial topic, and when it's finished, it will be the biggest train railway line in Europe, no, even in the world, I think, right? If I'm not wrong, even in the world. So it's another very big, very enormous project we are talking about, but in a different geography now we are, which is in Northwest Italy, which is in Europe. So, and it's interesting to see, I think, in a more democratic country, right? I see when I finished my fieldwork in the Susa Valley, Val di Susa, I realized that the same things are going on also here. Obviously, there are some differences. There are maybe huge differences sometimes between, the grassroots resistance or the, let's say, the colonization, I would say. There are differences, but what people go through is more or less the same, and even emotions. So I found similar patterns both in Hasankeyf and in the valley, Susa Valley. So the first thing I consider this case as a way of infrastructural colonialism is a type of internal colonialism, let's say. So right now we are not talking about a traditional, conventional understanding of colonialism, historical colonialism, which is, for instance, Britain colonizes India, or this historical understanding, or Turkey colonizes Cyprus. So this is not something like that. We are talking about different dynamics. So in the Susa Valley context, actually the grassroots movement started first as a movement of not in my backyard, but then in time it changes towards, it changed towards in a more transnational movement. And when I went there in 2021, it was a summertime. There were lots of people from around the world that support this movement, from Cuba, from also Kurdish region, from in Turkey, in Syria, so they all
people coming from other countries to Northwest Italy, to Susa Valley.
Yeah, and other.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the most important thing I think to underline is these people are coming from in regions that are also contested, that are also exploited by a project and infrastructure project or development project. So they actually share the same pain in a sense, they share this same feelings. So they have this a common solidarity. They have a very strong solidarity among each other. And also it happened also in Hasankeyf, like some of the Amazonian indigenous communities, they got in touch with Hasankeyf communities, I think against the Belamonte Dam in Brazil, if I remember correctly. So we have to see that these movements who suffer from the same, more or less the same problem, same extractivist projects, they create strong solidarities across borders. And it is something also about caring. So care is an effective labor in a sense. You care about the other, that you don't know about his or her background, culture or country, language, but you have a common ground because you both, fight for the same problems at the end: militarization, forced evictions, or violation of human rights, environmental problems, environmental destruction. So yeah, I think this is something we need to consider. I considered in my research.
That's really fascinating, that the idea that people could sort of get in touch from the Amazon, even though the context is really, really different, but there's some sense of, wanting to defend and wanting to, value something that's there. Just to sort of be clear about what's happening for people in the Susa Valley. They're building a massive railway line through the valley, right? So earthworks and construction, and the loss of nature, habitats, and potentially pollution as well from the construction project. And
exactly.
I suppose people objecting to the noise of the railway, or noise of the building site as well. are there kind of homes that are threatened? Are people kind of threatened with having to move away, or is that not the case in this one?
Just a few of them, as I know, and they need to be displaced soon. And of course, they don't know what to do. I mean, that time in 2021, that time they didn't know what to do, where to go. They were not informed well, they told me. But another important thing about people's resistance in the valley are something is very, very strong. And the ecological destruction is I think the main, one of the biggest controversial topics in the valley. And not only ecological destruction, but also the issue of pollution. But this issue of pollution goes beyond just the pollution. It's about health issue. There's a high chance that these during the construction, they need to is an enormous construction, and they need to get into the mountains. So, and this may create possibly asbestos or other chemicals to be released into the air, and this obviously will reduce the quality of life of people living there, and also animals, also plants, I mean, in general, the ecosystem. And also microdust issue. This is something also annoying people in their everyday life. Because I remember when I went to house of one of my participants, she's an old lady in 70s, I think. She's been living in the same house since she was born. And the lady told me that, I mean, we need, of course, infrastructures, for instance, A32 motorway that was, doing the connection between other regions and other cities in the valley. She told me, yes, of course, we need these connections, but it's just, decrease the quality of life in my garden. Before the motorway, I used to, go to the riverside. I can, even drink the water from there. But now it's not even possible because of the motorway. So I see, she told me, I witnessed this pollution, this, harmful effects of infrastructures. And now I'm, of course, suspicious and worried about the future infrastructural projects that will, be happening in the valley. So obviously, people have, hesitant and worried, and they are very right about worrying on this matter. So this is, I think, very important, because I should say that Susa Valley, the Piedmont region, in the Piedmont region of Italy, it's a bit, also peripheral, because when you think about north of Italy, you always, assume maybe north of Italy is the most developed, parts of Italy compared to south. But not always. When we consider, these peripheral and rural areas, and in Italian literature, it's called inner area. And the problems of inner area is always associated with marginalization, lack of employment, opportunities, and then out migration. People tend to, especially young generations, tend to migrate outside their villages and inner areas to the bigger cities, for instance, Turin, Milan, Bergamo. I mean, I should say these are very important industrial cities, and a lot of trade activities was, centered in these big cities. But when it comes to the, when you go away from the core, let's say core, what I mean is in Milan or Turin. When you go away from that, you see another reality. You see another reality that people has to encounter, let's say. which is related to these peripheral conditions. These infrastructures that has been built before in the valley, there are, for instance, many dams currently working in the valley, and then there are, motorways, highways, and then there is an Olympic stadium that was constructed for the Turin Olympics in 2011, I guess. It has been left abandoned, and it has no function at all at the moment. So people witness this, disappointed the investments that has been going on in the valley by the state or by the EU, or is more or less the same.
Kind of like a graveyard of this kind of this haunted by all these past projects that were promised.
Yeah, promised.
And then they're kind of left to rot.
Yeah.
But people are still having to live their lives around these things that have been built, right?
Yeah, one of the dams in near Veno's settlement. One of the dams, it has to pay every year a certain amount of monetary compensation to the people, to the municipality. Why? Because it produces obviously harmful effects, harmful air pollution, and like devaluing the quality of life. So this is like the dam tries to to recover, let's say, and people see that these are just disappointing at some point, because one of my participants, he told me that what are they going to do here? They will come here, they just get whatever they want to get, and they will forget us, because whatever they do here is not that we want them to do. We don't demand, because we don't need this kind of practices in our valley. So it is again like an illusion that we see, that how this internal colonization works within EU. So we need to see this dynamics, internal dynamics, that what kind of regions sacrifices for what kind of goals within EU. So this is controversial. And I was telling you my participant quote. So he told me we will be forgotten. And I really like the concept, for instance, of Jean Moore. She's the decolonial scholar, geographer. She uses the conceptualizes as the forgotten places as forgotten places.
Okay.
Is forgotten because global capitalism will be there, and then try to extract the resources, local resources, without considering what people or the environment needs in that particular place, and then it will be forgotten.
Yeah.
So, and this is also a process, as she calls Jill Moore. She calls the process is organized abandonment. It includes like colonization, neo-colonization, environmental degradation, land grabbings, and then expropriations. All these tools are contributing this organized abandonment of these regions, of these peripheral regions.
And I mean, that also kind of raises the question of like, forgotten by whom? And so
exactly, yeah,
you're landscapes, but maybe they're not forgotten by everybody, and in some of those places people still live, or even if they have to move away, they remember those places. And the other term that you use, which I haven't heard before, this idea of organized abandonment. Again, perhaps these places aren't fully abandoned, or something is built and then it's abandoned. but then people sort of still have to carry on their lives around it. I mean, but the people in the Susa Valley, do you get the sense that are they hopeful of being able to win this battle? How do they feel about the future?
So it's again, I think this is something ambivalent, I would say. Again, ambivalent feelings. Let me give an example to clarify it better, maybe. So I mentioned the forgottenness, and I mentioned about my participant and what he said about this. And we can understand that he has this fear of being forgotten, because they are explicitly also told me, like, I'm afraid for my future. I'm afraid. We don't know what it will be. And I want to, continue my life in the valley. I don't want to migrate. And he was a young person, by the way. He was a university student, and he was studying architecture. And he told me he wants to obviously stay in the valley, but he told me my elder brother left because of this conflicts. But I want to stay in the valley, and I want to see my future here. But I just see nothing. I mean, I have no hope about my future. Sometimes he told me, but at the same time, they are doing something. They are taking some actions to create this hope, to feel in this hopeful condition, and to create their own hope, their own kind of future. So this is something very important, and this is something manifest in the space, in the valley. It's not something only emotional, but also in material terms, I can say. So one of the very nice examples, great examples, is the Campo della Memoria, which can be translated field of memory. So this is a place that they created to save memories about Valley, and to preserve the culture and history. And I just now opened a quote from the activist that he was engaged this, the construction of the field of memory. And I want to read this, what he said to me. I think it's very important. He said to me in the interview in 2021, July, the meaning and purpose of the field of memory is life, which is not money. There is a place in the field that we cultivate, but it is more of a symbol and a metaphor. It's a reminder of the past, the present, and the future, our identity and our connection to nature, history, and culture. Forgetting all of these is a tantamount to death. So it allows us to continue the right path. The Bible says that one cannot serve two masters at the same time, neither money nor life. We have chosen life and created a link between memory and life. So this is what field of memory. So we understand actually that this is a place for agglomeration of collective effects, to convey meaning of liberated and decolonized life ways, because they show it. And the place of field of memory, by the way, where it's constructed, is just right in front of the construction site, TAV's construction site in Chiamonte area. So yeah, and also this example, I think, tells us why people reject the emotions that were imposed on them: fear, anger, being in a sad condition, sorrow. I would say that this area we are talking about, the valley, is highly militarized. So everyday people has to, encounter somewhere a civil police or a military force while going, while doing the daily activities in their lives without doing, protests. So in this kind of atmosphere, in this kind of, uncomfortable feelings that people have in the first place, they reject them actually, and they have the power to reverse or let's say to change these emotions into something more, beneficial for their community, such as hope, such as caring. But caring is not about, caring loving the nature. Is not like, not like superficial thing here. Is a caring is political act, and you choose what to care and how and what kind of emotions, with what kind of emotions. So we see that these people in Jean Moore's reference, when she talks about organized abandonment, she also talks about this power of people that refuse to give up hope. So this is important in the colonial placemaking. They refuse to give up hope. And we have to see what it entails, right? How it creates this kind of places for people. And actually, this is where it takes my argument into counter-periphery. So this is something I, by the way, coined, and in my thesis, in one of the papers, because the counter-periphery is something, the concept telling us to counteract the peripheral conditions the pre-existing peripheral conditions that have been already there in the valley for all these years.
You were referring back to the fact that people are sort of pushed to the margins by, there are these big cities and big infrastructure projects in between them. At the margins of those things, at the periphery of those things, that's where people are living.
I mean, yeah, of course, yeah, these people obviously marginalized, not just geographically, but also economically, socially, marginalization we are talking about. But also the conditions, like in the region that has, such as underdevelopment, lack of employment opportunities, and other, infrastructural facilities. So these are like pre-existing peripheral conditions, and they play a big role, let's say, in today's grassroots movement, because people are not just against a simple one project. This is beyond of that. Is beyond. We need to understand like this historical marginalities, how they are accumulated, and how they are accumulated and exacerbated by these infrastructure projects, the new infrastructure projects.
So there's a sense of kind of people being at the periphery, at the edge, and the kind of projects and initiatives piling up around them. So not just one thing, but over time, so lots more and more.
Exactly, accumulates. It accumulates. Yeah, it accumulates year by year, because a one mega project is not just, obviously it's enough for people to be against, but we need to see also behind the scenes, behind this picture, what's actually there, what has been already there, that annoying people and making people uncomfortable all these years. And we need to analyze this. So this is what I have done in my thesis so far. And being counteracting peripherality and putting their problems into the core of the issue, their demands, their problems into the core. And people try to, develop alternative imaginaries of their region, of their environment, other than the imaginaries of these mega projects. And this is how counter-periphery, it encourages the colonial practices in reshaping, life in general, in everyday life. And of course, this has a lot of, effective labor inside, the connections, social bonds, place attachments. So, I mean, these are very important.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, it's this sense of kind of not just focusing on what's happening in the present moment, but also looking back at the kind of histories of these places and how things have developed over time, but then also projecting into the future and thinking about, and that's where like hope comes into play, right? So thinking about what might be and how things might be different. It sounds like those visions are very important to people, and they're not just some kind of feeling of hope that's disconnected to everything else, but it's quite a practical thing that sustains people.
Yeah,
I thought it was interesting. Also, really interesting that you talk about care. Not just as a feeling, even though feelings are important, but as something that people do practically that is really makes a difference to people and things around them.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's counter-periphery in action.
Now I focus on in my thesis more about peripherality, peripheral context, and bringing that context into the core of the analysis, and try to find out what micro relations do and why they're important in this, let's say, story of mega infrastructure projects. Because in Susa Valley context, we see different backgrounds, for instance, Christian communities, anarchists, eco-anarchists, students who come from also other different, cities. And then we see also, grassroots and other NGOs near surroundings. And then we see also middle class, working class people. They're all mixed. They're all, let's say, melted in the valley to fight for a cause, or for, in sharing common goods.
Thank you so much, Cansu. That was really, really fascinating to hear about your work and about these places, Hasankeyf and the Susa Valley. Just really, really interesting. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation. Really, it was a pleasure for me to talk about my research in a podcast, and for the future natures as well.